this is Dr. Rosie Kuhn, and this podcast series is called Spiritual Immersion, Taking the Plunge. The intention of this podcast is to look at the ins and outs, the ups and downs of exploring who we are as human beings and spiritual beings, and where we get into trouble, where we get close to our comfort zone, where we get out of our comfort zone, where we get too scared and we retreat back into our egoic self or in our illusions or our thoughts about how things should be. Now, there's a lot to what I've just said, in a sense that my particular experience with engaging in the process of learning who I am, discovering who I am, engaging in the exploration, being curious about who I am, had me lean into what was challenging, what was scary, what was different than what I had been trained to think, was different than what I trained myself to think, what was different than what I trained myself to be. So this series is to look at the elements of who we are and as a spiritual being, but also as a human being, and where they kind of bump up against each other. So hopefully these will help support you in your own exploration. Now, I have been a therapist and a spiritual guide and a life and spiritual coach, transformational coach, training people to be transformational coaches. So I've had that whole extended experience of professionalism, we'll say. And at the same time, I've had a lot of personal experiences and have been engaging myself in this process of spiritual immersion for, basically 10 years consciously, and then the other 60 almost years not so conscious. So that's just the start of what's going on. So what I wanted to offer today, last week, last podcast, I shared with you some of my stories of spiritual immersion for myself. And so today what I want to do is just give you some heads up and some perspective on what is a spiritual immersion process and a spiritual emergence process. Kind of talked about that last time, but also what to look for, what's going on, and what to do or not to do. So just some very basics, because we're going to be stepping into this at a pretty deep level. There's a question, how far down the rabbit hole are you willing to go? And I think that's what the intention of this process is how far down the rabbit hole are you willing to go in terms of how far are you willing to go to explore and discover who you are as this phenomenal universal being, and with the fullest potential of the universe, basically. And so how far are you willing to go to explore and discover and to really utilize all the capacities that you have in this lifetime? And that's part of what I'm here to do for myself, is to discover my fullest potential. And so I have to keep going down the rabbit hole, or, up through the sky, or however you want to analyze, or have an analogy of that. But yeah, how far are you willing to go to explore and experience the fullness of you? So, spiritual immersions and or emergences come through different portals, different holes, different avenues. They can come through just an exploration that you're interested, you're curious, you want to know who you are. They can come through diseases or illnesses because you have been incapacitated by something beyond your control, and it may terrify you or just deeply move you. You may want to discover and figure out who you are within this disease process. You might have had an accident. You might have had some horrific experience happen, like a natural disaster, or your house burnt down, or you lost a loved one, or you're going through divorce or separation, or you wanted children and you can't have children, or you wanted a partner but you don't have. All those elements that go, what the heck am I doing? What's happening to me in my life? You may have an addiction process that you're going through, and you need to really attend to who you are inside this addiction. So this process can begin anywhere, anytime. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter how young you are. It's just part of our human spiritual evolution. Period. Let's see. I'm just reading my notes here as we're doing this. So another question that comes up is, how long do these spiritual immersion processes last? And so in a sense, something might happen. And sometimes in the book I wrote called Self-Empowerment 101, I talk about the 2x4 hitting you upside the head. In a sense, quite often, spirit, universe, God is trying to get your attention, and you keep ignoring. I know I should talk about myself. I ignored a lot of those messages and those little thumps or the little whispers. And if we don't pay attention, at some point we get perhaps a 2x4 upside the head that says, wake up, you need to pay attention to this part of your life. And so that's part of what occurred for me. So quite often a spiritual process will last. Could be a couple of days or a couple of weeks, could be a couple of months or years. When I started in the most recent spiritual immersion process, which was when I was 58, I thought, okay, just it'll pass very quickly, no worries, it's all good, I'm taken care of. And after a few months, someone said, "Oh yeah, that's a 9-month process," and I went, "Oh my God, I don't think I can stand it." But 9 months came and went, and then it was a year, and it was like, okay, now it's going to come to an end. And then it was 2 years and 3 years. And in the process, and I think I mentioned this in the previous podcast, that in that process, I began to see the gift of this elongated process that was to become, in a sense, the way of life for me. Because I was terrified of losing the life that I had wanted and I anticipated and I should have had, and all the things I should have had. And I'm emphasizing that because somehow we have this perspective of what the reality should be, and it wasn't that. And so the longer I was in the process, the more I relaxed and got to see who I was as a spiritual being having this human experience. Seeing the greater learning opportunity, seeing where I kept struggling with an old pattern that I wasn't willing to give up or wasn't even aware that I had. So the more elongated, in a sense, the longer you are on the planet, the more opportunities you have to learn and grow and know who you are as this spiritual being, as this divine presence. That's really wonderful. So it can take the time it takes. And if you're listening and you go, oh my God, there's no way I want to do this for years, then, I totally get it. And when somebody said, some guy, it was 10 years, I went, oh my God. And I'm trying not to swear here, but because I want to swear and go, fuck. Because it's like, I want my life back. And the truth is that this is my life, this spiritual path, if you will, of being in myself, with myself, both as the ego self, the me on the planet, 3D me, and the one that's the divine one. There's this relationship that I'm keep cultivating, and I couldn't do that in 3 months or 6 months. You need the time you need, and that's what it's all about. There's the fear that life is falling apart, and there is an element of that life is falling apart. Part of my process was I did go through a second divorce. I did go through bankruptcy. I have not had the financial prosperity. My hands are floating in the air as I'm saying, I haven't had the abundance and the prosperity that I thought I would always have. But what I have instead is a simplicity. And again, people go, I don't want simplicity. I want my life. I want security and stability and safety. And the idea here in this spiritual immersion process is we find that and discover that safety isn't in what's in the bank account, and it's not in what's in our 401k, as in the United States, retirement plans. It's not in having property or having a house or having a golf club or membership or a good car. We find and discover that quite often the simplicity of life really brings much more peace and serenity and pleasure and delight and bliss. So what does this look like? Will my life fall apart? Probably it'll fall apart in ways that it will. Just like a lot of people will begin their spiritual immersion process once their physical life starts to fall apart. They're diagnosed with cancer or some other disease or autoimmune disease, which so often is caused by stresses of the world and the way that we create our reality. So your life may do that. So ways to be with this process, quite often people will, there's some irritability and restlessness and discontent, and you don't know how to do this and you don't know what to do. You might be exhausted. You want to go to sleep. You want to lay in your bed and in a fetal position for days. That's all normal. It's not a mental disease. It's not a mental illness. It's a process, a gestation process, if you will, or a transformative process. And in the cocooning of yourself, there are these times where there's nothing to do. We call it the big fat be with. There's nothing to do. There's nowhere to go. And it's very challenging to just be. And so quite often we want to eat to calm ourselves, or to eat, or distract ourselves with sex or relationships, to use substances. We might feel like we want some medication and just to calm ourselves to help go through this process. And that's all good, but just being clear about what you're doing in terms of trying to minimize the irritability or the discomfort. Quite often people think they're in the discomfort that they're sick or crazy, or that they've got cancer or something's wrong physically. And if that's the case, if you think there's something wrong, go check it out with a doctor or with your health practitioners so that you're clear that this is not about some physical disease, but this is a spiritual immersion process. And in the last podcast, I did mention the difference between spiritual emergence and spiritual immersion, which is basically the same. But there's a point quite often in either process where you may get beyond your capacity to work with yourself or support yourself, and you may need other support by perhaps a psychiatrist or psychologist or health practitioners that can help you beyond normal. One person, I always make up names. I'll call her Sally. Sally had this experience where she basically lost her mind. And it was a spiritual emergence process, but the only way that she could get support was through a mental health psychiatrist and medication. And that's what got her through the hardest time. And having support from a spiritual director, energy workers, massage therapists, acupuncturists, nutritionists that can help with natural supplements. These are all ways of supporting yourself through this process. I work with a woman who does energy clearings. So all kinds of ways to get support through this process is really important. And I think that was pretty much what I wanted to talk about today, was those kinds of things. Like, what is it? What do you do about it? Where do you go? How long does it take? All of those things, which is all pretty much unknown, because all of it is a single, there's all of us going through it to whatever degree that we're going through it consciously. And each of us is going through it individually. And each one of us has our own unique individual process that we have to understand and accept. So getting support is really, really a good thing. And this is a start of it, just listening hopefully to these podcasts and others that are out there. The other thing I wanted to say is, if you're in this process, make sure you're drinking a lot of water, get all the rest you can get. Be out in nature, hug trees, or just ground yourself. Play with cats and dogs or children where there's the innocence and you can bring beauty into your life. Be creative. Take up knitting or painting or music of some sort or sing. Things like that that are part of who you are as an essential spiritual being. And so just engaging in that. One other thing I'm going over, but, in the mornings when I was going through this, I would have my coffee and I would sit down with my book Oneness, which is what I did and always do. But that was the beginning of my practice, the process that I was going through, which was an everyday thing. And then there was a point where I would have a glass of wine, which would be about 5 o'clock. And that glass of wine basically gave me the completion of that time period. And then I could, for some reason, it helped me transition into giving my brain and my emotional self and energetic self a break. So, just those kinds of things. You just never know what yours will be. So that's pretty much it for now. If you have any comments or questions that you'd like me to answer on these podcasts, please feel free to leave a comment here or email me at rosie@theparadigmshifts.com. You can find my books, such as You Know You're Transforming When is one of my books. You can find them on Amazon.com. Just go to Rosie Kuhn and I'll show up with all my books. Or you can find me on my website, the website is theparadigmshifts.com. All right. Big hugs, blessings to you, and bye for now.